Welcome to Shatter.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. She said it in front of everyone. At a dinner party. Her friends. My friends. Music low, wine poured, laughter still echoing in the room. And then it went quiet. She tilted her head, smiled like it was harmless, and said, "You're just convenient. Not exciting." Someone chuckled. Someone else choked on their drink. I heard the clink of a fork against a plate. That's how quiet it got. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just stopped chewing. She went back to her glass like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just peeled the skin off my dignity in front of 10 people. But what hit harder wasn't her words. It was the way they didn't surprise me. This wasn't a new version of her. This was her, unfiltered. And I realized, she didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because she believed it. And in that moment, I decided I was done trying to convince her otherwise. I didn't argue. I didn't joke it off. I didn't ask her to explain. I just shut down the part of me that still cared to be understood. That night, I helped clear the table. I laughed at someone's joke. I poured her a second glass of wine like nothing was wrong. But something had shifted. Something quiet. Permanent. Because when a woman tells you that being with you feels like prison, you don't argue with her. You give her the freedom she's craving. That's what I did. But freedom, it turns out, isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's a mirror. And she wasn't ready to see what it reflected back. After that night, I stopped volunteering pieces of myself. No more checking in. No more over-explaining. No more softening truths to protect her comfort. I didn't leave. I just stopped performing. And she noticed. But only halfway. The silence didn't alarm her at first. It just made me less interesting. And that worked in her favor, for a while. She started spending more time out. Longer dinners. More texting when she thought I wasn't looking. But I always noticed. I always knew more than I said. One night, I walked into our kitchen and her phone lit up on the counter. Face up. No password. She was upstairs. A name I didn't recognize. Underneath it. "You have no idea how boring he's become." It didn't sting. It confirmed. She wasn't cheating. Not in the physical sense. But emotionally. She had long left the room. And I had let her. That's on me. A week later, we were at a friend's birthday, rooftop bar, soft lights, everyone playing happy. I stood by the railing, drink in hand, listening to someone talk about their startup launch. Then I saw her. In the corner. Close to someone new. A man I'd seen once before. I think he worked at her agency. Hand on her lower back. Too familiar to be innocent. She laughed like she used to laugh with me. Loud, careless, private. Then one of our mutuals leaned in beside me and said casually, "You see what she's doing, right?" I said nothing. But that was the first blow. Not because I felt betrayed. Betrayal needs trust. That had already been burned out. No, the real punch was realizing how long I'd been convenient. How long I'd been background noise in her life. That's when the turn inward began. I started waking up earlier. Gym at 6 a.m. every day. Deleted social media. Stopped responding to anyone who didn't bring peace. She didn't notice. Not yet. But the weight was already shifting. I wasn't reacting. I was removing. Removing the access. The explanation. The approval. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I didn't even tell her I knew. I just kept showing up stronger. Quieter. Less involved. And in silence, I started to become someone she could no longer predict. She thought she was exploring life without me. She didn't know. I'd already begun my exit. The thing about silence, it gives you space to observe. And in that space, the truth always leaks out. I didn't go looking. I never needed to. When someone believes you're emotionally gone, they stop hiding their mess. They get sloppy, comfortable. That's when they reveal everything. It started with the bank alerts. Small charges. Boutique wine bars. Unfamiliar ride shares. Same 2 locations repeating. Then the hotel receipt showed up. Not printed, not handed to me, but on the shared cloud. She forgot to disable sync. Room service for 2. Champagne for 1. The date matched a night. She said she was just grabbing drinks with Ashley. Ashley was at her sister's baby shower that weekend. I knew because I got the invite too. But I said nothing. I smiled. I played calm. Not because I was weak, but because I had no interest in stopping her. I wanted to watch who she really was. A week later, I saw the full text thread. She'd left her laptop open, careless, maybe arrogant. Dozens of messages, late nights, pictures, plans. Him asking if she was finally done babysitting. Her replying, "Almost. He's still useful." Useful. That was the word that did it. Not the cheating. Not the lies. That word. Because it confirmed what I'd known but hadn't accepted. I wasn't her partner. I was her placeholder. From that moment on, I detached, not emotionally. That part was already numb. I mean strategically. I made quiet changes. Separated bank accounts. Canceled the joint credit card. Had mail redirected. Booked a storage unit and started slowly clearing my side of the closet, item by item, unnoticed. She was too distracted to care. Too high on her new life to sense the shift in the air. But it was happening. I wasn't leaving like a man pushed out. I was exiting like a man planning a controlled demolition. She didn't know I'd already met with a lawyer. She didn't know I had copies of her messages, receipts, call logs, even timestamps on when she was home and when she wasn't. I didn't need revenge. I needed freedom, the kind you earn with patience and precision. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront her with the evidence. I just kept disappearing in small, deliberate ways. And still, she didn't notice. She thought she was in control. But control only exists when the other person is still playing the game. And I had already left the board. It happened quietly. No fights. No accusations. Just a calculated vanishing act. It started with my phone. I switched numbers. Transferred everything personal to a second device she didn't know existed. The one she had access to stayed active, but empty. No messages. No movement. Nothing to provoke. Just digital silence. Then I changed my routines. No more coming home at predictable times. No more Friday night takeout. No more gym at 7 p.m. I was now running at 5 a.m. Out the door before she even opened her eyes. At first, she didn't care. She had her distractions. New places. New faces. But when someone you're used to controlling suddenly becomes unpredictable, you start to notice. She asked once if I was okay. I said I was. That was the last explanation she got. Then came the cards. The joint ones were already closed. The ones she thought were still connected, I canceled quietly. One after the other. No notice. Just declined payments she couldn't explain. She called the bank. They told her they couldn't discuss the account. Her name wasn't on the paperwork anymore. That's when the panic started to seep in. She asked why I was being so distant. I said I wasn't. I just had things on my mind. She said it felt like I was somewhere else. I was. And she was late to realize it. Then I disappeared for 3 days. No messages. No warning. No posts. I drove out of state. Rented a small Airbnb by the coast. I brought only a bag, my journal, and silence. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to remember who I was before I became something useful to someone who didn't value me. While I was gone, she called 14 times. Left 6 voicemails. Texted things like, "We need to talk," and "Are you okay?" And eventually, "Is there someone else?" I didn't answer any of them. I watched from a distance, fully present in my absence. She wasn't worried for me. She was scared she'd lost her control. That's the thing about people who build cages. They never think you'll find the key. And when you finally unlock the door, they don't know what to do with the emptiness. When I returned, I didn't explain where I'd been. She didn't ask. Not directly. But everything in her body screamed confusion. Uncertainty. For the first time in years, I wasn't a constant. I was a question she couldn't answer. And that terrified her more than any truth ever could. I didn't care about the man. He wasn't the reason we fell apart. He was just the vacuum that filled the space when respect left the room. But I watched him. Quietly. Efficiently. I knew his name. I knew where he worked. I knew which firm handled his payroll and which name his second phone bill was under. Because unlike her, he wasn't reckless. He was arrogant. And arrogance always leaves a trail. It took 2 weeks to gather what I needed. No hacking. No tracking. Just pattern recognition, public records, and timing. Turns out, her new adventure had more to hide than she did. Company assets being used for personal travel. Expense reports that didn't match activity logs. Business dinners that looked suspiciously like dates. I didn't expose him. Not directly. I packaged the data and left it on the digital doorstep of someone who would care, a compliance officer at his firm. No name. No trace. Just evidence. Precise. Clean. And then I walked away. Within a month, he was under review. She didn't know it was connected to me. She just said one night, offhand, that he'd been super stressed lately. Things at work. I just nodded. Said nothing. But I could see it in her eyes, uncertainty. The shine was wearing off. He was supposed to be her escape. Her upgrade. her excitement. But now he was unraveling, and she couldn't fix it, couldn't even explain it. Meanwhile, I kept disappearing. In rooms I used to fill with attention, I left silence. In moments where she used to count on me reacting, I gave her nothing. No jealousy, no questions, just stillness. That stillness? It started to eat at her. She asked me one night if I hated her. I looked at her and said, no, because I didn't. I didn't have the energy to hate someone who never truly saw me. What I had was distance and clarity and enough discipline to let consequences arrive without my interference. See, I wasn't trying to ruin him. I was just done pretending I didn't see what he was. And when people like that are exposed, they don't collapse loudly. They fold quietly, in shadows, just like I did, but for a very different reason. She thought she could trade stability for thrill. But thrill without foundation is just chaos in a better suit. And chaos always burns out faster than it begins. You don't need to humiliate someone to make them feel exposed. Sometimes, all it takes is silence in the right room. It happened at a dinner. Her circle, not mine. A mix of co-workers, 2 of her college friends, and 1 woman I didn't know. Sharp, perceptive, the kind who notices things others miss. We were mid-conversation when someone brought up relationships. A harmless question. What's the one thing that breaks trust faster than anything else? Someone joked, lies. Another said, secrets. A third added, silence. Then the new woman turned to her, my girlfriend, and said quietly, almost too soft to register, you really thought no one would notice? The table paused. A few exchanged glances. She froze, eyes wide for just a second before forcing a laugh, brushing it off. But the damage was done. That one sentence cracked the glass. Because beneath her curated image, the outfits, the charm, the forced lightness, people had started seeing what I already knew. She wasn't grounded anymore. Not stable. Not respected. And I hadn't said a word. I never talked about what happened. Not to anyone. But the shift in me, it spoke for itself. People noticed how I'd changed. Calmer. Sharper. Clearer. They started asking questions she couldn't answer. Is everything okay with you two? Why does he look like he's already gone? Where's the guy who used to carry her whole world? And she couldn't explain it, because the truth wasn't loud. It wasn't scandalous. It was simple. She lost something without even realizing it was slipping. The presence of a man who made her feel seen, protected, understood. She traded that for temporary fireworks. And now the air was full of smoke. I stayed polite, present, but distant enough that even strangers could feel it. I answered when spoken to, but never offered more than required. In group photos, I stood at the edge. In conversations, I leaned back. She tried to pull me in, jokes, touches, stories from when we were good. But the silence between us had turned cold, and the world around her was starting to reflect it. Not because I said anything, but because nothing speaks louder than someone who used to orbit you, suddenly standing still. By the time the night ended, she wasn't laughing. She sat in the car staring ahead, hands tight in her lap. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't ask me anything. Because I think she finally understood. The room no longer protected her. It had started watching. Isolation isn't always physical. Sometimes it's just the silence you can't fill. She didn't realize it at first. She still had her phone, her friends, her social calendar, or what was left of it. But something had shifted. Not just between us, but around her. The invitations slowed down. Conversations shortened. The texts she once responded to with laughter now earned only quiet glances. People weren't cruel. They were simply distant. Detached. They saw enough to stop defending her. But not enough to intervene. That's how isolation begins. Not with rejection, but with polite indifference. Meanwhile, I was still there. Technically, we lived under the same roof. Slept in the same bed. Moved around the same spaces. But I wasn't in it anymore. I was a shadow. She spoke. I answered, if needed. She reached out. I acknowledged, barely. We moved like strangers who once shared something worth remembering, but had nothing left to rescue. I became her ghost long before I physically left. And the deeper she fell into that silence, the more desperate her attempts became. She'd try to bait me with small chaos. Jealousy traps. Forced vulnerability. Nostalgic touches. I didn't bite. She asked once if I still loved her. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because explaining the absence of something isn't my job. She began to unravel slowly. First in small bursts, Forgotten appointments, snappy comments, late nights pretending to be out, but circling the block just to see if I noticed. I did. I always did. But I gave her nothing. Then came the breakdown moments. One she didn't think I saw. Crying alone in the hallway. Pacing the living room at 2 a.m., staring at her reflection too long. Fixing her makeup just to wipe it off again. Because here's what no one tells you. When someone finally pulls all their energy back, it's not rage you feel. It's emptiness. Heavy. Quiet. Unbearable. She used to call me controlling. Cold. Predictable. Now I was something else entirely. Untouchable. I didn't yell. I didn't block her. I didn't post revenge or drop ultimatums. I just became unavailable. Not to punish her, but to return to myself. The man I used to be, before I handed my peace over to someone who couldn't hold it. And now she sat in the center of a life that used to orbit her, and it was still. No noise. No feedback. No validation. Just her. And the echo of someone she never thought would walk away without looking back. There's a moment when silence becomes too loud to ignore. And she finally broke. It was a Tuesday night. Quiet. No tension. No storm. Just stillness. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, lacing my shoes. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed like she was holding herself together with pressure. She didn't raise her voice. That would have made it easier. Instead, she asked it flat, dry, like she was already bracing for the answer. What happened to us? I kept my eyes down, focused on the laces. Left loop, right pull, tight knot, clean. She moved closer. Do you hate me? I looked up, finally. Not with anger, not with pity, just clarity, stillness. And I said nothing. Because what do you say to someone who called you a prison, only to beg for the bars back once the doors left open? She started pacing, listing off what she missed, the late-night conversations, the safety, the way I used to laugh at her dumb stories. She said it felt like I died, but was still haunting the house. Then she asked if there was someone else. There wasn't. There never was. But I let the question sit in the air, unanswered. Not to hurt her, but because even that didn't matter anymore. She wanted to rewind a story I had already finished reading. At one point, she started crying. Real tears, not the kind used to soften a fight. She said she didn't realize she'd gone too far. She didn't mean to make me feel like I didn't matter. But feelings fade when they're consistently stepped over. I watched her break in real time, not from guilt, but from the weight of her own consequences. The realization that I had nothing left to give. No emotional reserve. No explanation. No demand. She asked if we could fix it. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and said the only thing that felt honest. There's nothing left to fix. Then I walked out, not slamming the door, not storming off, just gone, the way peace exits when it's no longer welcome. She didn't follow, because deep down, she knew the man in front of her wasn't trying to win. He had already accepted the loss and turned it into liberation. That was the last time she asked me to talk. Because silence, when it's final, doesn't invite negotiation. It just waits to be understood. It didn't fall apart all at once. It crumbled in fragments, slow, messy, and without warning. After that night, I didn't sleep there again. My things were already gone, months in the making. What I left behind was intentional. A few shirts, a worn-out pair of shoes, a toothbrush. Symbols, not belongings. She noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. The silence that used to give her power now made her unravel. The distance that once made her feel desired now suffocated her. Because she was alone. Not just without me, but without the version of herself she built through me. The woman who always had a hand to hold, a voice to calm her, a man to lean on. Gone. I kept watching, not to punish her, but to understand how quiet consequences echo the loudest. Friends stopped texting back. Photos stopped getting likes. Her work suffered. She began showing up late, distracted, unfocused. She called me once, didn't say anything, just silence on the other end. I listened for a few seconds, then hung up. It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. The final realization came for her slowly, but completely. No one was coming to save her. Not the new guy. He was already out of the picture, his name reduced to a whisper in rooms she no longer entered. Not her friends. They were tired of the drama, tired of defending choices they didn't understand. And not me, because I no longer lived where explanations were needed. One afternoon, I passed by the cafe we used to go to. She was sitting alone, head down, stirring a cup that had long gone cold. She looked, not broken, Just empty. Like someone trying to remember how it felt to be needed. And failing. We made eye contact for a second. I nodded. Nothing more. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Just stared, like she couldn't recognize the man she once believed would never leave. And she was right. That man was gone. What stood in front of her now wasn't bitter or vindictive. It was free. The crash wasn't loud. No screams. No scenes. But it was total. She lost more than just me. She lost the version of herself that was kept alive by my presence. And once I removed that oxygen, the mask collapsed. Alone, she had to face who she really was without the illusion of control. And it turns out, she didn't like the view. The end didn't come with a slammed door or a shouted goodbye. It came with quiet. Weeks had passed. The dust had settled. The storm was gone, not because it passed, but because I stopped standing in its path. I hadn't seen her since that day at the cafe. No calls. No messages. No closure request. Just silence. The same kind I once gave her in pieces. Now she lived in it completely. And then, one evening, I got a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten envelope. No return address, just her name. Inside, a page and a half. Neat, intentional. The words were clear, even if the tone wasn't. She wrote that she didn't understand what she'd broken until she realized nothing around her worked anymore. That it wasn't about betrayal or mistakes. It was about erosion. The slow death of respect. She said she didn't recognize herself. That she missed me, not for what I gave her, but for who she was when she had me. She ended with, "If you ever decide to come back, I'll still be here." I folded the letter in half. No anger. No triumph. Just a long, still breath. Because I wasn't coming back. And she knew that. She just needed to say it out loud to make peace with the truth she never wanted to face. The next morning, I returned to the cafe. Not for her. For myself. It had become a part of my routine again, but now, without weight. She wasn't there. A different barista. A different playlist. The same chair I once sat in across from her, now occupied by someone else. That's how life moves forward. Quietly. Without fanfare. Just forward. I walked past the old bookstore, past the park where we once sat in silence pretending to be connected. I didn't feel loss. I didn't feel regret. I felt peace. Not because I won, but because I didn't break myself trying to fix someone who wasn't ready. I had loved her. That was real. But I had also outgrown her. The version of me she could manipulate no longer existed. And in the stillness of that morning, it all felt complete. No applause. No witnesses. No final plea. Just the truth, resting exactly where it needed to be. She once said being with me felt like prison. She wanted freedom. So I gave her exactly that. And she didn't survive it. Because freedom isn't about escape. It's about becoming someone who knows what to do with it. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.